Hey everybody, Mike Miller, Herald Times, joined by columnist Jeremy Price, back at Assembly Hall after, it was certainly a possibility, I think, as we noted on the Senior Day Scoop Talk here at the old Ball Hall, but...
I want to say I told you so, but
yeah,
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, NIT basketball in Bloomington, Indiana hosts St. Francis, and after 20 hairy minutes, got it together early in the second half and came away with an 89-72 victory here over the Red Flash. It means Indiana will host Arkansas quite possibly Thursday. I think that's the earliest they could play, although that as we start this video, date and time, TBA, could pop up
any minute now.
As you're watching it, you probably already know. We don't, but so it goes. Yeah, this was, I think everyone was kind of wondering what Indiana team would show up after the disappointment. And say what you will, I mean, obviously Indiana's play during January and February really eliminated from the NCAA tournament conversation, but obviously going into Selection Sunday, it was not clear just how Indiana's resume would fare with the selection kitty. Obviously, everybody watched that selection show thinking, they thought Indiana had a chance. I'm speaking of IU's team and coaches and players. They thought they had a chance. So there was, obviously still disappointment on Sunday evening when that bid did not come. So I think everyone coming into this game was wondering just what team would show up. What would Indiana look like? Was it how easily, how quickly would they be able to shake disappointment and really focus in? Even against an opponent that just talent-wise was overmatched and outsized, basically just outclassed. And frankly, for 20 minutes, it was a search. It was a real search for just a focus. Playing without Romeo Langford, which we'll get to momentarily, but it definitely took some time for this Indiana team to really figure it out. I mean, the game plan was right there to be known. This is not a very good defensive team, St. Francis, a team that went zone, and really once you're able to pick apart that zone tonight, you were able to get some points. But really, again, Indiana was settling for jumpers just like they did against Ohio State. They were losing the 50-50 balls, especially early. Just again, that poised and purposeful approach of getting to the rim and doing what this team should be doing more often than not was just not there. And at halftime, you're staring at a 6-point deficit and wondering, oh God, what is about to happen here?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly had the potential to get ugly in that second half in many, many ways. But, it was kind of interesting. I noted this on Twitter pregame that it wasn't like this team came in feeling like this was drudgery or they really didn't want to be here. I never got that sense. If anything, I thought they were a little too loose pregame. A lot of laughing, a lot of smiles, a lot of joking around. It was just kind of like, I don't know, it was sort of had that feel that they thought that, well, this is going to be a walk in the park. We're playing St. Francis, no need to bring the A game or whatever. Yeah. And other than the slow start they got off to, then they turn around, jump out, put a 14-0 run together, wind up jumping up as many as 9, and then it was like they kind of, just clearly lost focus, clearly kind of put things in park, so to speak, and that's when things changed. And that's what happens in postseason basketball. It's all about where your focus is, where you are mentally, and obviously mentally this team was not where it needed to be. And you bring up Romeo Langford. Obviously, that's the big story for a lot of people is Romeo not playing tonight. And, you do have to wonder, what effect does that have psychologically on the rest of this team? Are some of these guys thinking, well, if Romeo doesn't need to play, do I need to play in this game? Is this important? Or, do they feel like, oh, Romeo's hurt, we got to pick it up and step it up in his place? Are some of these guys thinking, well, Romeo's probably not going to be here next year, so there's a chance for me to sort of show what I can do to fill in my spot? And we saw a lot of that from Al Durham tonight. I think, had a career-high 22 points. And, if there's one guy that I'm looking at to really make a step up the ladder next year, I think it's Durham in terms of just his leadership and what he can bring to this team. He's going to be one of the most experienced guys on this team next year as a junior. So, I think that it's it's a good experience for this team to play without Romeo, I think. And most of all, obviously, if Romeo can come back and play at some point in this tournament, it enhances Indiana's chance to win the NIT. There's no doubt about that. But I do think what's more important is how this team plays, what they show they've learned, how much progress have they made sort of in establishing that culture and identity that Archie Miller wants his teams to have. Tonight was a good example of where it's clearly a work in progress. You had it missing big time in the first half, and then it showed up big time in the second half.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely interesting just with Romeo, obviously. He said in Chicago when he was asked, if he was going to play in the NIT, and he said yes, and, by all accounts, he's Archie Miller said if this were an NCAA tournament game, he would not be playing, in the NCAA tournament, but
I dare you to disprove that statement.
I know. Whether you actually believe that, I don't know if I necessarily believe that, but that's what they're going with. And again, it does bring up the situation where you're Romeo Langford. You're very likely going to be declaring for the NBA draft very soon after the season's over. Is it really worth playing in these games? And then again on the Indiana. And you're right. There's a couple different dynamics at play, both for the guys saying, how do we play without Romeo in both? Or I should say also, without Romeo, maybe this is a chance to step up. And like you said, I thought we saw that early on from Devontae Green, came out doing what he's been doing the last couple of weeks, just shooting threes, hitting threes, and also Al Durham, just the way he kind of turned it on in the second half. But no, it is interesting just kind of seeing this team. And, again, this is kind of what makes the NIT, well, no, I take that back. The NIT, I don't find this terribly interesting as far as a tournament that you can really project toward next year, because I just think this team is going to look so totally different, both in terms of personnel and makeup over the coming months, that I don't really think that these next few weeks really are really going to tell you a whole lot about what next year's team could be or will be, or I don't really think this really bleeds over to next year a whole lot. But I do think that being able to finish the season on a potentially positive note, playing into New York, playing deep into this tournament, could at the very least just maybe tie a more positive bow on the end of this season, which up until this point has been very disappointing. I think that I don't think this tournament really matters big picture for Indiana, but at least in the short term, with some of these guys maybe getting a more positive taste in their mouth this season, Archie Miller being able to maybe being able to set expectations a little bit more clearly for what he wants to do with this team, I think he can maybe get some things out of that.
Yeah, I mean, there is some potential value here. Whether that carries over to next year, like you say, is very debatable. We've seen teams that make an NIT run and they parlay that into springboarding into the NCAA next year. We've seen teams make an NIT run. Penn State Exhibit A won the NIT last year. Everybody was trumpeting how much progress they'd made, how great this year was going to be, chief among them Coach Pat Chambers. And they're sitting at home with a losing record for the season, playing in no postseason basketball whatsoever. So fat lot of good that did them. So, winning it is no guarantee, but I think for where this program's currently at, if you can get past these first couple of rounds, because I think the first and second round are the most difficult in the NIT, because there's that sense that you are in a second-tier tournament. The NCAA is gearing up at the same time. Everybody's excited about that and filling out their brackets and talking about those games. And you're just filling TV space basically in between NCAA games, giving ESPN something to televise. But I think if you can get through the first couple of rounds and you get to the point where you get to the quarterfinals and you're playing for a trip to Madison Square Garden, and then you get to Madison Square Garden for a team that's really won nothing now since the 2016 Big Ten Championship, I think it would be of value to this team to establish some sort of winning mentality, some sort of positive reinforcement for where they can go, given that the strength of this team is going to be largely in what is now the freshman and sophomore class and the incoming freshmen that will follow. So if they can develop something to build off of, I think that can behoove them in the long run.
Actually, Juwan Morgan brought it up. I don't know if he was unprompted or not, but he brought up the women's team last year, and obviously, obviously different. It's not a parallel situation, but he did bring up the fact that the women's team went to the WNIT and made the most of it with obviously a really talented senior class, a core group that had been there for 4 years and had kind of been built around. But obviously, they made the most of it and turned it into a really uplifting event, and here they are, this year. In the NCAA tournament. So, Juwan kind of brought that up and said, look, I mean, it's not, yes, we don't want to be here. This is not our goal. We didn't come into the season looking to play in the NIT, but we're here. We might as well make the most of it and just look at the women's team. They were here last year in the WNIT, and now a year later they're in the NCAAs. A lot can change in a matter of a year, but if you can get that experience playing in these games and make of it what you will, kind of taking this stage and trying to turn something out of it, it could be a positive. So. It remains to be seen what team shows up against Arkansas on whatever night they play. But again, everyone's saying the right things right now. Everyone's looking at it apparently through the proper lens and trying to at least make something out of this.
Yeah, and if you look at history in terms of Indiana and the NIT, 79 NIT turned into the 81 NCAA championship. It was just 2 years later before there was a payoff, but there seemed to have been a payoff there. 85 NIT run pays off in the 87 NCAA championship. So I think there can be a foundational benefit for this team. Whether it pays off next year might not necessarily be the case. I think a lot of us feel like Indiana's best basketball is 2 years away.
Yes.
But if you can get the experience, that winning mentality, the postseason, feel that postseason pressure and have some success in such a situation, maybe that actually benefits in the Big Ten tournament in the future. That would be nice instead of one and done. And maybe that benefits in the NCAA tournament, whether it's next year or 2 years from now. So, you know, there's a lot of ifs and ands and whatevers, but ultimately what I think is important is for this team to continue to establish a baseline of how they go about doing things as much as anything else.
Sure. No doubt about it. Well, if you want to keep watching, I will keep playing. We got another game left. Again, you probably know by now we do not, as we sit here right after, shortly after 11 o'clock, they have not announced it. So won't go too much into the details there, but it'll be a rematch with Arkansas. Funny enough, they'll be coming back here actually next, I believe, November. So a little double dipping with Arkansas this year, and then you get them back here in Assembly Hall next year. So interesting matchup. Hoosiers probably won't have Romeo Langford, just kind of given the short turnaround that's potentially on deck. And obviously Arkansas will not have Daniel Gafford, who had I think it was a career best effort at the time of that game in mid-November. So potentially it's Deron Davis's revenge. Deron actually played really well in that first round, in that first matchup. Obviously just couldn't get that tip in at the end. But we'll see. Another chance to watch his team play. And I guess we'll go from there. It's the NIT.
We'll be back at the Hall one more time at least.
Indeed. We'll see you whenever.